Hello, and welcome to Hopeful Conversations brought to you by Robbie's Hope Foundation. I am your host, Kari Eckert. Joining me today is Max Skinner from Movember, a men's health organization that raises awareness for prostate cancer, testicular cancer, and mental health, including suicide prevention. Thank you, Max, for joining us, and to our listeners, welcome to Hopeful Conversation.
Thank you for having me, Kari, and thank you for everyone at Robbie's Hope for the support.
Okay, so tell us about Movember for someone who doesn't know a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So Movember is the leading charity changing the face of men's health across the globe. So what does that mean? We are a nonprofit organization based out of Melbourne, Australia. That's actually where we were founded back in 2003, about 20 years ago. And it started off as kind of a very grassroots movement focused around prostate cancer. And just to give you some kind of historical background, our two founders, the Garoni brothers, were enjoying a pint of beer at a local bar in Melbourne. And one of their friends was actually battling prostate cancer at the time. And kind of simultaneously, one of their friends' mothers was battling breast cancer at the time. And they noticed kind of the outpouring of love and support and resources for the breast cancer movement, which is obviously fantastic. But they felt that men's health issues, particularly prostate cancer, needed to garner a little more support and attention. And so that first year in 2003, they started a very grassroots fundraising campaign with about 30 supporters focused on supporting their friend's prostate cancer journey and raising money for him and his medical battles. Fast forward 20 years later, it's grown to a network of about 6 million supporters. We've raised over $1 billion for men's health projects and funded over 1,300 health projects worldwide. And we've expanded our markets and on-site presence to LA, New York, Melbourne, London, Dublin, and Toronto. So it's very much a global operation. We have 3 key focus areas that we raise money for. Again, I mentioned prostate cancer, which is the most common cancer amongst older generations. In fact, 1 in 8 men will be diagnosed with prostate cancer at some point in their lives, which is alarming and sobering. But it's important to know these metrics to be a little more proactive about our health. And then the second cause being testicular cancer, which is the most common cancer amongst younger gentlemen aged 18 to 35. And then the last piece you touched on was mental health and suicide prevention, which is one of the key focus areas that we introduced in 2018, just given kind of the mental health crises we're experiencing within the male demographic. Unfortunately, in the US, 3 out of 4 suicides are made by men, which is, again, very sobering and an alarming statistic. But it's good to know these things, again, so that we're a little more proactive about our mental health.
I like the word proactive quite a bit. Interesting that you started out of Australia. And though working now for 5 years in the field of mental health, a lot of like the progressive movements come from Australia in youth mental health in particular. The US, I would say, is kind of lagging. I don't know if you find that for men's mental health.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're spot on there. We actually just had a work conference, kind of conference retreat in Melbourne a few weeks ago. They brought all the markets together at Movember, which was really cool to meet kind of my global counterparts and share best practices and all that. But we really learned about how the other markets, particularly Australia, operate. And there is such a focal point around mental health in youth, especially with youth in sport. We have a great rapport with the Australian the Australian Rugby League, and we have a whole collaboration and partnership with them. And their focus is obviously kind of putting these mental health resources and tools in the hands of young people at an early age, and try to plant that seed with our youth, so that when they grow up, they have these kind of remedies and tools readily accessible at their fingertips. So. You're absolutely right. It's a different ball game over there, and they're a little more progressive and proactive about their mental health.
So tell us about the mustache. What does the mustache represent for Movember?
Yeah, I mean, you see it behind my right shoulder over here. The mustache is kind of our icon. It's our walking billboard, so to speak. during the month of November every year, that's our big Movember campaign, right? That's where probably 90% of our fundraising takes place, just concentrated in a 1 month period, which is hyper targeted and focused. But during that month, folks are encouraged to grow out a mustache, to raise awareness and raise funds for men's health issues. And again, the mustache is kind of our walking billboard. It's a great way to galvanize a community and get people excited. And it's a great conversation starter. Like, no matter how great or crappy of a mustache you can grow, ultimately it's a conversation starter. And for us, conversations mean everything, right? Like especially when you're talking about mental health. So it's a cool little icon, and it's come a long way in the last 20 years, to say the least.
Be a Mo bro. That's the lingo.
Be a Mo bro and a Mo sister. There's other ways to support Movember. Obviously, women can't necessarily grow out mustaches, so we do offer other ways that they can support the movement. We have a whole physical activity challenge called Move for Movember, where we encourage folks to run or walk 60 miles during the month of November for the 60 men that we lose to suicide every hour around the world. And so that's kind of a cool physical endurance activation that anyone can participate in. You could host events, you could mow your own way, which is kind of a way of giving our supporters carte blanche to raise awareness and funds however they see fit, whether it's hosting a happy hour, a tournament at your local softball league, or whatever it may be. Our community and fundraisers really get unique and creative with the ways they support Movember.
Cool. So let's go a little bit into men's mental health in particular. I found some things on the website that I found kind of interesting and catchy. Movember obviously has done a nice job with marketing for things that we can remember and apply to our lives, but be a man of more words. Can you explain a little bit of what that means to Movember?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of just touched on it, but we're all about having conversations, and you'd be surprised how just opening up the dialogue and having a very candid and honest conversation about your vulnerabilities or your mental health or your emotional well-being with your friends and family, it can really go a long way. And ultimately, there's the whole saying, "You are not alone," and that's something that we're preaching at the rooftops here. Is just having a conversation can save someone's life, and opening up yourself to be more vulnerable, wear your emotions on your sleeve. Like, as men, we tend to put this kind of emotional guard up, right? Where we don't feel comfortable seeking help, and we don't feel comfortable having conversations like this until it's too late and it bubbles up in a negative way at some point down the line. So it's all about, again, just opening it up, checking in on your friends. If you notice some signs, or if you feel like something is off with one of your loved ones, reach out to them, make sure they're doing okay, and just have an honest conversation with them, because it can really go a long way.
Can you mention your exact website for us?
Yes, it is us.movember.com, and we encourage anyone to pop onto our website, sign up. Even if you don't plan on fundraising for us, it's a great way to be entered into our communications funnel to receive more information on our causes or the programs that we fund and other ways to get involved. So it's just us.movember.com. And there's a lot of great information and resources, particularly around prostate cancer, mental health. If you're currently battling prostate cancer, or if you're a prostate cancer survivor, there's a whole supporter journey post-op that you can follow along and be part of a community that understands your experience and pain. Same thing with mental health. There's a ton of cool resources and tools on our website, one of which is called Movember Conversations, which encourages folks, or basically gives folks talking points to have those difficult conversations with loved ones that might be struggling, and you might not know where to start to have that conversation. So Movember Conversations is a great kind of thought starter, and kind of auto-populate some different talking points based off of your experience. So really encourage folks to come check out our website, sign up, and be entered into our Movember family and ecosystem.
Thank you. I feel like your website is packed with really good applications for regardless if a person is a male or female, whatever their age is. Just displaying and explaining conversation starters, how therapy works. It's truly packed with a lot of different information. So in these three particular topics, prostate cancer, testicular cancer, mental health, how would you gauge like the stigma surrounding them? Hopefully lessening. Like how do you gauge the progress of Movember?
Great question. With prostate cancer and testicular cancer, it's a little clearer of a path because we've noticed a lot of progression in terms of preventative care and resources. I mentioned that 1 in 8 men will be diagnosed with prostate cancer at some point in their life. Luckily, that statistic is improving drastically because of some of the preventative measures and some of the programs that we have supported over the years. So that's in a great spot. Testicular cancer, I mean, the thing with younger people, and especially people in your audience that might be listening, is younger people tend to not want to seek out help. We think we're Iron Men, and at the end of the day, if something feels off, just go get checked out. It's as simple as that. And testicular cancer, luckily, is such a preventative disease if you catch it early enough. So if you feel something off, you feel a lump down there, don't be bashful. Go talk to your doctor. There's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's not a point of pride. It's just a common sense thing. So luckily, those two diseases are fairly preventative. Again, if you catch it early or if you're proactive about your health. With prostate cancer, if you have a family history of prostate cancer, you need to go talk to your doctor, especially when you're, reaching the age of 30 or later, just to see when you're genetically predisposed to that disease. Get a PSA test if it comes to it, if you're a little bit older, in your 50s or what have you. So again, those two diseases are a little more preventative if you're proactive about it. Mental health is a little bit more nuanced because there's so many different risk factors that people are still analyzing today. I mean, COVID was a prime example of kind of the whole social isolation piece, and we still don't know the long-term effects on COVID within the suicide prevention sphere. So it's a little more nuanced and hard to kind of pinpoint exactly, the inflection point, what have you. But luckily, I think the narrative has shifted around mental health universally. Like, it's become more universally acceptable to talk about, which is fantastic. There are more tools and resources, and I think people have turned the page a little bit in terms of being more proactive about their mental health. So without being able to pinpoint exactly certain data points, there's still a lot of research that needs to come out. I think we have a long ways to go when it comes to mental health and suicide prevention.
Yeah, absolutely. Data is difficult, and being a fundraiser and running a nonprofit, very important for metrics and grant funding and for donors and whatnot, but also just for people to know. I know entering into this field of suicide prevention, in particular for youth, some of the statistics surrounding living with a mental illness are kind of staggering, that like 6 out of 10 people wait over like 6 years to seek treatment for a mental health condition that's diagnosable versus a physical ailment. Like you said, if you feel something, you go and you ask for some help pretty quickly. But sadly, with mental health, we're still seeing some of those those delays and letting problems progress versus treating them sooner. We have progress to make, I think, as a whole.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm not a professional clinician or therapist by any means, but just seeing firsthand kind of this shift as a society, I'm hopeful because I do think people are talking more and being more vulnerable and seeking help. I do also, I'm encouraged by the fact that there are more ways of support beyond just traditional therapy or medication. And I think people are starting to realize that, and don't get me wrong, medication certainly works for a lot of people, but it also has some side effects that are starting to come to the surface. So I'm encouraged by the fact, especially living out in California, there's so many different holistic ways to improve on your mental health. Meditation. People are starting to explore psilocybin therapy, which I think is really interesting. So all that being said, I'm encouraged that there are alternative options other than traditional therapy and medicine that are available now.
Even just mindfulness. I read a lot about this. Like, I'm 50. My dad had prostate cancer 20 years ago. I completely remember. Robbie was a little baby. I remember when my dad had surgery, like not talking about it at all. But like, if you think of my dad's parents, physical exercise was not a part of their daily routine, like in the 60s and 70s. But those generations tend to be healthier, physically healthier. But now, like for young people, like I don't know what we exactly want to call what generation is. There's a lot of terms. But like mindfulness and the effects of that, like taking the time to do the breath work, to step away, to not feed your brain when it's telling you that you're awful, that you're never going to have success, that you're always going to be alone, fill in the blank, but stepping away and stopping ourselves. Like some people still think that's like foo-foo, like, oh, you're a yogi if you just all the negative stigmas, I guess.
Yeah, and that comes with kind of proof of concept and research and data to help back up those types of alternative therapies. And now you're absolutely right. I mean, with physical activity, there's obviously such a direct correlation between mental and physical health. Like I personally feel it whenever I'm anxious or stressed, I'll go for a run. And luckily I have the luxury of living in Southern California, so I've got the beach and all that to run by. But I find that going for a run is therapeutic for me personally. And then at the tail end of it, I'll just sit on the beach and meditate for 5 to 10 minutes and try to be mindful and appreciate that moment. I think my whole thing is people can find their own form of meditation, whether it's running, whether it's playing with your dog or breathing exercises, whatever it may be. There's ways to be mindful within the scope of your own realm, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Do you find with Movember like that you have to approach different marketing techniques for different age groups in men? Like, what are some of the stereotypes? Or stereotypes, I don't want to even use that word, but the differences between, say, a 20-year-old male and a 65-year-old male?
Yeah, I think you'll probably get a similar answer with any nonprofit or foundation that you ask that question to. Is direct to mail is not working anymore. It's not effective. Even email marketing, the open rate and conversion rate is trending down. Our most effective form of communication is texting. We use a third-party texting application called Hustle, and it kind of automates texting to hundreds of thousands of supporters, and you're answering them, you're talking to them in real time, and the open rate there is, as you can imagine, a lot higher than a general kind of cold email. So texting has been great. We do kind of cater different forms of communication based off of the age group or demographic. For example, older generations are more willing and able to email, as opposed to younger generations are more communicative on texting or through Instagram or other social media channels. So it is a bit nuanced, and our marketing team does a great job of kind of parsing out different demographics based off of their preferred social media channels.
So what about the differences in like how they express their emotions, men in those different age groups? Does Movember have any findings there that might be interesting?
We don't have any scientific or research-backed findings, but I can speak firsthand. I think younger generations are way more progressive in terms of speaking out on their mental health, and it seems to be a common, not only pain point, but focal point for these younger generations to be a little more proactive about mindfulness or meditation. And I think there's so much going on in the world right now, and the immediacy of information through social media has never been higher before. And there's a lot of distractions, and people are so in tune with what's going on globally with a lot of different situations or crises or horrible situations that mental health has to be a focal point. And I think younger people recognize that. And I just think, to your point earlier, some of the older generations, they weren't taught to put their mental health at the forefront like they were with physical activity, like you mentioned. So I think luckily, again, I think that page is turning a bit, and younger people are being a little more proactive about that. I'd like to think.
Prioritizing things a little bit differently. So men on average die 4 years earlier than women. Is that statistic holding true?
Yeah, it was 6 years earlier, probably about 5 years ago. So it's improving, which is great. Um, Hopefully, some of the programs that we've been funding over the years is helping improve that statistic. But the point remains, men are dying earlier than women for mostly preventable reasons that we've talked about here today. Um, Women are great about seeking help and talking to their friends if something's wrong, and being more proactive about our health. Men can learn a lot from women in that sense. But yeah, that statistic kind of remains in that ballpark.
Interesting. Men can learn a lot from women. I like that as a woman, but it's like the medical system is kind of getting more complicated. I feel like as a consumer of, I'm 51, and reaching like an age where I want to be very proactive about my health. Being a consumer of medicine is not an easy thing anymore.
No, it's not. And depending on what market you're in, it gets a little nuanced, especially when you're talking about Movember being a global organization. Some of our markets, and something that I learned about in Australia a few weeks ago, our markets operate with different healthcare systems. Like, for example, it's universal healthcare in Australia as opposed to kind of the the system that we have here in the States, which is a little more difficult to secure, health insurance if you come from a low income, underserved community. So our policies are treated differently, and some of the programs that we fund as an organization are treated differently market by market. Like, for example, we just funded a new program called the Mo Institute, which is we're pumping in, investing $100 million into this program, this kind of educational research hub, to basically influence policy within different governments around mental health in particular. It's called the
Really?
Mo Institute. It's going live in Australia soon, but it'll take a bit to bring that concept and that program over to the US because our political system and healthcare system is so different. We're a lobbyist political system. So it's kind of interesting to understand how Movember operates market by market. You would think it would just be under one umbrella, but that's not necessarily how it works.
Oh, I want to know more about the Mo Institute. That sounds like right up my alley. When I'm like trying to get just everyone to know, but like advocacy in the field of mental health is really, really slow and really, really difficult. Tell me a little bit more about the Mo Institute. What can Americans, because we have ambassadors across the globe, but most of our listeners are going to be in the US.
Yeah, totally. And it's keep in mind this is the program, the Mo Institute is in its infancy, so it's still very much so in the preliminary kind of foundation stages. But basically, the whole idea is to bring together the brightest minds in the mental health research space together under one roof, and to enact research and find certain data points, and kind of almost expedite the process a bit to get our government the exact research that they need to influence different policies to improve mental health across the globe. That's basically the concept at its core. What that looks like in the U.S. market, we still don't know. Again, it's a little tricky when it comes to working with our government here, and it's obviously the country itself is so vast and large compared to Australia and other countries that we operate in. So more to come. I'll obviously keep you in mind and share as soon as we have more clarity.
And we're behind here in the US. Like, even there's been a lot
Correct.
of research, or
Yes.
just I'm a reader or a consumer of news, like old school newspaper, and try to get sources from a lot of neutral sources, not just one party versus the other. But like there's a lot of research coming out that like women's health isn't even like investigated enough in the US. Like, it's like, what? It's 2024.
It's crazy. Yeah, you'd think the way we market ourselves that America would be ahead of the game in all spheres, but that does not seem to be the case, unfortunately.
So a little bit more, I guess, about testicular cancer and prostate cancer, like the survival rates, because preventable diseases. Like, what are some of the stats there?
I think, and I don't have these stats top of hand here. And again, I'm not a professional clinician by any means. I sit on the fundraising team. But I know, I believe it's like 99% of testicular cancer diagnoses are treatable, preventable. Again, if you catch it early enough, I think
That's super high. That's
the
awesome.
success rate is super high. I mean, even if you catch it a little late in the game, the surgeries and post-op is kind of ahead of its time. So it's very preventable disease. I actually don't have those metrics around prostate cancer on me. I'm happy to, I'll follow up with our cancer director and kind of get you those stats if you want to share that with your community.
I think the stats they tell a story, right? I was thinking of more of mental health and some of the stats surrounding there, and like how I totally believe that suicide is preventable. Like, I wouldn't do the work that I do if I did not believe that suicide is preventable. And the reason that is because mental illness is treatable. Mental illness is treatable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can personally speak firsthand. The reason I am so passionate about working at Movember, particularly around mental health, is because I've been touched by suicide throughout my life. And unfortunately, lost my mother to suicide about 10 years ago.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. One of those life situations where all you can do is really turn a horrible experience into something positive. And that's why I'm so passionate about working here. But I wish, to your point, I wish I knew then what I do know now about what resources are available. And again, that whole narrative has really shifted over the last decade, where it wasn't really socially acceptable to talk about. And I was a 21-year-old kid at the time. The signs were incredibly obvious now looking back on it. Had I known then what I do know now, I would have been a little more proactive about getting my mother help, but it wasn't talked about then. And I couldn't really see the signs, and I don't beat myself up about that at all. But it's just interesting to see kind of that narrative shift. And, to your point, it's a preventable disease more so now than it ever has been.
You're absolutely right. So 10 years ago, I was a funeral director prior to raising my kids. So I think when I lost Robbie, I entered into a kind of, you and I share a similar journey. We've lost someone very close to suicide. But I had sat on the other side of the table, like helped families like you. I helped 21-year-olds like you. And 10 years ago, the conversation was very different. Now, like, I can't imagine living with the lie of like trying to say that Robbie died by something else. Like, and I'm so proud that you say I don't have guilt about that. Like, but we still have progress to make. We have so much progress to make.
So much progress to make. Yeah, no, but it starts with us having open conversations like this and being vulnerable. And I think one thing that I learned, after my mom passed, and I lost a fraternity brother a few years after that happened to suicide as well. And he came from a very Catholic background, and they were very hush hush about the whole situation and wouldn't actively speak on it. And I took the opposite approach. And the best way I learned how to grieve and process my mom's passing was to talk about it and to surround myself with other people who shared a similar experience, because that was the best way for me to personally heal and feel like I was part of a community that understood my pain. So I encourage anyone who's had a loss, whether it's cancer or suicide or whatever it may be, not to shove those emotions down and be more proactive and talk about those feelings, because again, they'll bubble up in a negative sense at some point down the line. And on a personal healing level, I think it helps just to get it out of your system and to talk about it.
Vulnerability. Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. I did not know that until you just said that. And it's tough. It's not easy, even 10 years later.
I know. Everyone has a why in life. You'd be surprised how, a lot of my colleagues and coworkers here have been touched by our causes to some degree. And there's a reason we all work here. And I think we all like to believe in something bigger than ourselves. And I'm sure that's why you work in Robbie's Hope, and why you have such an amazing community of supporters. And Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's interesting. Like as time has gone on, and the 10-year anniversary is actually coming up in a couple months in
Mm.
June. So it's certainly a big milestone for me personally, and I don't think I've felt the weight of that milestone yet. But over time, it has gotten easier. They say time heals all wounds, but that wound is still very much there. And luckily, the first few years after she passed, I definitely struggled with it immensely. I was young, didn't really know where to turn to some negative habitual patterns in my life that I have since nipped in the butt, thankfully.
Good.
But luckily there are a ton of alternative options, and I've figured out my own path on how to treat my PTSD and anxiety and stress stemming from my mom passing. So anyways, we've come a long way, but a lot more work to be done for sure.
Yeah, I still don't love that one that time heals all. It's probably true, but it just feels kind of like a stab in the back a little bit sometimes. And I know it's not, I've tried to really, really focus on that people don't say things to hurt you. Like people usually say things with good intentions, but sometimes it's just like, oh, I just have to, let that go.
I know, especially when it comes to suicide. I remember, shortly after my mom passed, and again, this is 10 years ago, people would still joke about it, or like in passing, they would make jokes or remarks like, "Oh, I'm going to kill myself, like if I don't get this or that," like jokingly. And it would always really affect me, but I never said anything. And to a certain point, or it got to a point where I started to not bark back at people, but just let them know that was hurtful to folks who had been through suicide or whatever it might be. And I don't hear that as often, those jokes as often as I used to, which again, I think plays into the whole narrative shift, which is fantastic.
Yeah,
Um,
language is so important. And I think younger generations are doing a nice job of taking the lead, and older generations are learning from younger generations that some language is just really, really important.
yeah, words can be triggering, and I do think as a society we've come to recognize that a little bit more, and have been a little more sensitive around that, which is great.
Oh, well, it's been a pleasure learning about Movember and getting to know Max. I think this is going to really touch our listeners. We end every podcast with the same question, and it doesn't need to, it's just for you to answer. And that question is, what does the world need to hear right now?
Hmm. Man, that's a beautiful question. I think the world needs to hear that despite all the turbulence we're experiencing, you know, economic downfall, inflation, besides all the stresses that we're experiencing in the world, that the bulk and majority of the world is good. And even if these negative experiences and stories take precedence in our media, the majority of people are good and want to change the world for the better. And we can't lose sight of that. And we need to stay in this together and be one community under the same umbrella.
Thank you. Thank you, Max, for being a guest today on Hopeful Conversations. To our listeners, be sure to tune in to our next episode. And until then, remember, hold on, pain ends.